My name is Evelyn Marston. I turned 70 this past spring. Though most mornings I still feel like the same woman who used to rush between a lecture hall and the grocery store with a baby on her hip. I live quietly now in Asheville, in the same modest house I bought after my husband died. People say I'm composed, steady, perhaps even too reserved. I've carried that steadiness like a lantern through widowhood, through raising my only daughter alone, and through the quiet years that followed. But no lantern could soften the words that sliced across the brunch table that morning. "I'm not your bank anymore," Ava said. Her voice was sharp, cold, wrapped in the smugness of someone sure the whole room was on her side. We were seated at a trendy cafe near Pack Square, sunlight streaming in through high windows bouncing off the brass fixtures. Ava had insisted on the place. She arrived, perfectly styled, tailored blazer, diamond studs lips, painted in a color too bold for breakfast. Two of her friends sat beside her, women from her Pilates class, both of them leaning in as if the performance were for their entertainment. The words were louder than necessary, and a few diners turned their heads. My fork trembled as I set it down. For a moment, I wasn't sure if she was joking. I waited for the laugh, for the roll of her eyes that would soften the jab. None came. Only the faint smirk that curved her mouth, a silent underlining of her dismissal. I managed to swallow a sip of coffee, though it tasted bitter. "Ava," I said quietly, "what are you talking about?" She leaned back in her chair, arms folded like a judge delivering a verdict. "You expect too much. Always needing help, always leaning on me. It's not sustainable. I have my own life." Her friends exchanged glances, one of them nodding in sympathy, as if she understood the burden I supposedly was. The humiliation burned hot in my chest. I, the woman who had taken out extra shifts to pay for Ava's ballet recitals, who had clipped coupons to make sure she never went without, was being painted as a dependent. I thought of the shoebox under my bed, the one stuffed with old receipts, dental bills, tuition invoices, even the pale yellow stubs from the grocery store in 1989 when I survived on discounted pasta and powdered milk. Those slips of paper told a different story, one she had long ago chosen to forget. "I'll be fine," I murmured, though my voice cracked. I set my napkin across the half-eaten plate and pushed back my chair. Ava didn't stop me. She only picked up her mimosa glass, catching the light, and smiled thinly at her audience. Outside, the mountain air hit my face crisp and cool, but it didn't ease the sting. Each step down the brick sidewalk felt heavier than the last. 70 years of holding our lives together, and in a single sentence, my daughter had redrawn me as a burden. I walked toward my car, the echo of her voice still ringing already, knowing I would not forget the moment. The air outside that cafe clung to me long after I drove home. It was the kind of morning that should have carried calm the Blue Ridge Mountains soft against the horizon sunlight, painting the rooftops gold. But I felt only the weight of old years pressing in. Ava's words had ripped open a seam I had stitched closed decades ago, a seam lined with memories I had worked hard not to revisit. I unlocked my front door and went straight to the bedroom. Beneath my bed sat a weathered shoebox, corners soft with age lid barely holding together. Inside were slips of paper no one else would find worth keeping, receipts yellowed with time, tuition stubs, notes scribbled on grocery lists. To me, they were not scraps. They were proof. Proof that I had kept my daughter afloat, proof that every penny I earned found its way to her. I lifted one curled receipt from 1986, the year Ava needed braces. My husband, Charles, had been gone less than a year then. He collapsed on a damp March morning while checking the gutters, a heart attack at 42. I was 39, left with a 5-year-old and a mortgage. I remember the ache in my hands from scrubbing other people's houses by day and grading community college essays by night, every dollar routed toward the orthodontist. By the time the braces came off, I was holding down 3 jobs, teaching part-time at Asheville Buncombe, technical cleaning vacation rentals on weekends, and working the register at Ingla's grocery, on nights when Ava was asleep at a neighbor's. I told myself children deserved to smile without shame, and if her teeth could be straight, while her world had bent so suddenly, it was worth it. Another slip bore the faded ink of ballet lessons. Ava had begged for them at 7, her wide eyes fixed on the pink slippers displayed in the studio window downtown. I didn't have the heart to say no, even when the tuition equaled half a week's pay. I took on extra cleaning shifts that summer, my knees raw from scrubbing tile so she could twirl in satin shoes. On recital nights, I sewed ribbons onto her costumes by hand, sitting alone in the audience when other families filled whole rows. Later came the bills for private school. The public system in those years struggled, and Ava's teachers hinted she was bright enough for more. I filled out scholarship forms, begged for discounts, and still carried the difference by taking weekend tutoring jobs. There were months when I lived on oatmeal and coffee just to cover the fees. I told myself, education was the ladder that would lift her higher than I had ever reached. Every faded slip of paper carried a story of sacrificed dentist appointments, winter coats, textbooks. They looked like nothing more than ink and numbers, but to me, they were fragments of my life traded without hesitation. As I sifted through the box, I wondered when those sacrifices had turned invisible. Perhaps they had blurred over time, replaced in Ava's memory by the comfort of always having what she wanted. She had never seen me counting tips in the dark kitchen or sitting in the car after a shift because I was too tired to climb the steps. I had shielded her from that. I wanted her to feel safe, not burdened by my exhaustion. I closed the lid gently and slid the box back into place. My knees ached from crouching, and I eased myself onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. I could still hear Charles's voice from those first desperate years. Teach her resilience, Evie. Don't make her think the world will always provide. I had nodded then, promising, believing I could do both. Shield her from hardship, and teach her to stand on her own. But looking back, I wondered if in my fierce determination to give her more than I ever had, I had blurred the line between love and indulgence. I had thought I was buying her safety, opportunity, freedom. Perhaps what I really bought was her blindness to the cost. The mountains outside my window stood steady, ancient and unmoved, as if to remind me of all that endured. But inside me, doubt gnawed, sharp and relentless. The next week, I drove across town to Ava's condo, a sleek tower of glass and steel that rose above Asheville's older brick buildings. From the lobby with its polished stone floors to the rooftop pool reserved for residents, every inch of it screamed a life far from the one I had carved out of exhaustion and frugality. Ava met me at the door wearing silk loungewear, the kind I once saw folded neatly in glossy catalogs, but never thought to buy. Behind her, the view spilled wide across the mountains, blue ridges rolling endlessly under the afternoon haze. I remember thinking that the landscape was the only thing real in that apartment. Everything else felt borrowed, bought, polished, arranged to impress. She handed me a latte as if I were a guest in a hotel. "Mom, I need you to approve this month's transfer early. I'm headed to Charleston with friends, and the bills will overlap." The transfer was what she called her allowance, $15,000 wired each month from the trust. She used the word casually, like someone asking for her paycheck. I sipped the latte, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "Ava, you know I already covered Mia's tuition this week," I said. My granddaughter had just turned 18, preparing to leave for UNC Chapel Hill in the fall. Her tuition payments were sent directly to the university, bypassing Ava altogether. It was the only way I could be certain her future stayed intact. Ava waved a manicured hand. "That's separate. College is your project with her. The allowance is mine. I need it, Mom." The word need caught in my chest. I thought of those slips of paper in my shoebox braces, school fees, recital costumes, things that had once defined true need. What Ava called necessity now was a spa membership designer handbags, first-class flights to New York for a weekend of networking. I looked around her apartment at the gleaming counters, the wine fridge, the framed photos from European trips. There was no sign of Mia here, no family photos, no textbooks on the coffee table, no trace of her daughter's life. Ava had curated her space for an image, a successful woman admired by friends, envied by strangers, cushioned by money she hadn't earned. Still, guilt pricked at me. I had made this possible. Every month, with a signature and a quiet nod, I had reinforced the lie that she couldn't stand on her own. I told myself it was love, a mother's responsibility to support her only child. But deep inside, I knew it was fear. Fear that if I stopped, I would lose her altogether. Ava leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. The girls want to book the suite on King Street. I'll need the funds cleared by Friday. Can you do that? Her tone was flat, businesslike, as if I were her accountant. I wondered if she remembered the nights I had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with grating still unfinished, or the meals I skipped so she could have seconds. Did she know what $15,000 meant to me at her age? It was 5 years of saving, not a single month's allowance. I thought of Mia then, bright, shy, eager to begin a life that wasn't built on smoke. She had thanked me quietly when I told her tuition was handled. Her gratitude was simple, unpolished, and it gave me hope that the cycle might yet break. But as Ava tapped her manicured nails against the counter, waiting for my agreement, I felt the old conflict rise. Love and guilt braided together so tightly, I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. I nodded just slightly, because it was easier in that moment than saying no. Ava smiled, triumphant already, back to her phone. I sipped the latte again, though it had gone cold. Somewhere in the distance, I heard church bells from downtown, a sound older than both of us. It reminded me that time had a way of stripping things down to their truth. And the truth was, this my daughter believed her life depended on money I could give. I left her apartment with the image of Mia's face fresh in my mind, promising myself that at least one girl in this family would learn what real independence meant. The gallery was all glass and light, the kind of place where even silence felt expensive. A friend from my book club had invited me, promising a pleasant evening of wine paintings and polite conversation. I dressed carefully but simply. Navy skirt, pressed blouse, the pearl earrings Charles had given me on our 10th anniversary. I hoped to blend in, to enjoy something beautiful for myself. Ava swept in 20 minutes after I arrived, her heels clicking confidently against the polished concrete floor. She had chosen a crimson dress that drew eyes immediately, her hair styled to perfection. Beside her trailed 2 women I didn't recognize, both wearing the sort of dresses that never came from a department store. They clustered around her, laughing too loudly, eager satellites circling a bright star. I tried to keep my distance to lose myself in the paintings. But before long, Ava's voice carried across the room. "She doesn't understand money," she said, and I knew before she even finished that the she was me. She clips coupons. Actual coupons. The women laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. One of them covered her mouth as if to soften the cruelty, but her eyes gleamed with amusement. Heat surged into my face. I stood frozen before a landscape painting, though I couldn't see its colors anymore. My hand instinctively went to my purse, the old leather bag I had carried for years. Inside, tucked in a side pocket, was a torn grocery coupon. I had cut it weeks earlier out of habit as much as necessity. The edge was frayed from being folded and refolded, proof of a life where saving mattered, where dignity was built one small choice at a time. I wanted to vanish into that painting, to dissolve into brushstrokes and leave the room behind. Instead, I turned, slowly catching Ava's gaze, just as she looked away, as if I were an inconvenience, not a person. The humiliation spread through me like ink in water. Around us, guests sipped wine and discussed brushwork, oblivious to the small cruelty being carried out at the center of the room. I thought of the years when I had counted pennies for milk, when coupons were not a joke, but a survival. Those slips of paper had kept food on our table. Now, in Ava's world, they were a punchline. I set my glass of water down on a nearby ledge. The condensation left a ring, a small mark that felt like my presence in that space, noticed only when it left a stain. I slipped out quietly, letting the night air hit me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The sounds of laughter and music trailed after me, muffled by the glass doors. I walked toward my car, each step slower than the last, my chest tight with shame. Inside the car, I sat with my purse in my lap. I pulled out the coupon, smoothing its bent edges against my palm. It was for 50 cents off oatmeal, a brand I had bought since Ava was a child. My thumb traced the faded print, and for a moment, I felt the kitchen of our old house, the cracked linoleum, the scent of coffee brewing at dawn. Ava still asleep in her room, while I clipped coupons under the soft hum of the refrigerator. Those mornings had been hard, yes, but they had been honest. I folded the coupon once more and slid it back into my purse. A relic, a reminder, a symbol I couldn't abandon. The car engine started with a groan, and I guided it toward home, the road winding under the shadow of the mountains. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they needed to. Ava's laughter echoed in my head, mingling with the sharp memory of those yellowed receipts under my bed. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my jaw ached from holding it clenched. I sat in the quiet for a long while, the torn coupon a weight against my side, wondering how many more small humiliations I was meant to endure. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that should comfort, yet it pressed heavy against me. I carried the torn coupon upstairs, set my purse on the dresser, and felt the weight of every humiliation I'd swallowed in the past year. Ava's words at the cafe, her laughter at the gallery, the way she had turned me into a punchline when all I had ever tried to be was her shelter. I walked to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed and opened the lid. Inside, among folded quilts and keepsakes, lay a bundle of envelopes tied together with string, their edges yellowed and soft. Letters from David. He had written them during our brief years together, sometimes leaving them on the kitchen counter when he left for work, sometimes tucking them into my coat pocket. After his sudden passing, those words became my anchor. I untied the string carefully, my hands shaking, and unfolded the first letter I touched. Evie. It began in his slanted handwriting. Don't forget that life is harder than we imagine for our children. They must be ready for it. Teach Ava resilience, not indulgence. That will be your greatest gift to her. I read the lines twice then. 3 times the words blurring through the sting in my eyes. Resilience, not indulgence. The phrase cut through me like a blade. Had I betrayed him, I thought of the braces, the ballet lessons, the private school tuition. All things I had justified as investments in her future. But later came the allowances, the luxury, the indulgences disguised as necessity. Where had the line blurred? At what point had I shifted from providing a foundation to funding a fantasy? Another letter slipped free. This one dated just months before his death. Promise me you won't shield her from every storm. She'll need to learn to stand steady. You've always had that gift, Evie, give it to her, not comfort that dissolves in her hands. My throat tightened. I had promised him everything and delivered something else entirely. In my fear of Ava growing up fatherless, I had overcompensated, giving her ease when he had asked me to give her strength. I set the letters on the quilt and walked to the window. Outside, the pines swayed in the mountain wind, their dark silhouettes bending and returning, bending and returning. They were resilient, just as David had asked Ava to be. I pressed my forehead to the glass, listening to the branches creak, hearing in their movement a kind of whisper. Not of reproach, but of reminder. The house felt cavernous around me, its corners heavy with the years of choices I could not take back. I sank into the armchair by the window and pulled the quilt around my shoulders. The wind carried a low whistle through the eaves, a sound that seemed almost like a voice. For a moment, I let myself believe it was David, patient as always, repeating what he had written long ago. Teach her resilience. I closed my eyes and pictured Ava's face at the gallery lips, curved in mockery eyes, gleaming with careless superiority. I imagined David's disappointment not in her, but in me. Perhaps the cruelest truth was not Ava's entitlement, but my part in nurturing it. The night stretched on the cabin timbers, creaking with the shifting wind. I stayed by the window until the stars dulled and the sky paled with the first gray of dawn. My body ached with fatigue, but a sharper ache rooted deeper. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to wonder if love might mean something I had always feared, the strength to finally say no. The morning after that long night by the window, I shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, the taste of yesterday's shame still bitter on my tongue. The kettle hissed softly as it warmed the only sound in the house, besides the creak of old wood in the cooling air. I wrapped my robe tighter, poured the steaming water over tea leaves, and sat at the table, letting the heat rise into my face. That was when my phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent vibration against the tabletop. I picked it up, expecting a message from Ava. Perhaps another demand, perhaps an apology, though the latter felt unlikely. But it wasn't Ava. It was Patricia Hayes from Whitman Trust Management. The message was brief, the language cool and professional. Approval required monthly allowance request. Ava Marston, $15,000. Please confirm by 5:00 p.m. My hand went still, the phone glowing in my palm. I stared at the words, reading them again, as if my tired eyes had misinterpreted. But no, the numbers were clear. $15,000, Ava's allowance, waiting for my approval. A laugh rose in my throat, though it wasn't a happy one. Just yesterday she had looked me in the eye and declared, "I'm not your bank anymore." Yet here it was, undeniable proof that the current ran in the opposite direction. Her condo, her trips, her image, they all rested on the quiet weight of my signature. I set the phone down gently, as though it were fragile glass. My tea had cooled, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I let my mind drift back to my 67th birthday, the day Patricia had come to my house with a briefcase full of papers and an explanation that felt more like a revelation. The Marston Family Trust, established by David's grandfather, expanded by careful investments, and preserved through generations. I had known it existed in vague terms, the way one knows a river runs nearby without seeing its banks. But until Patricia slid those documents across my table, I hadn't realized the full scope, or that my name in black ink had been written as primary trustee. The number still startled me, $22 million in total assets. Managed portfolios, commercial real estate holdings, dividends. All of it entrusted not to Ava, not to distant cousins, but to me. The documents had been clear control passed to the surviving spouse at retirement age, provided they met certain conditions of oversight and fiduciary responsibility. I remembered Patricia's words, calm and firm. This trust is designed not just to preserve wealth, Mrs. Marston, but to ensure it's used with prudence. It grants you full discretion over distributions. You are in every sense the steward of the Marston legacy. At first, the responsibility had terrified me. I was a teacher, a widow, someone who had scraped and saved her whole life, not a financier. But over time, with Patricia's guidance, I learned the cadence of quarterly reports, the weight of approving transfers, the quiet authority of deciding what was sustainable. The trust had flourished, even grown. And in all those years, Ava had never once asked how the money arrived. She had only assumed it would. Now, as I sat at the kitchen table with my phone buzzing again, a polite reminder for action, the irony pressed against me like a second heartbeat. Ava thought herself powerful because she could mock me, dismiss me, even cut me down in public. But the truth was inked into contracts and upheld by law. She depended on me more than she ever realized. I picked up the phone once more, my thumb hovering over the screen. Approve. Deny. 2 options. 2 words that held the weight of an entire relationship, a lifetime of choices, a history of sacrifice, twisted into entitlement. The kettle ticked as it cooled the house silent again. I did not press either button. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone back on the table and folded my hands, steadying my breath. For the first time, I wondered not if I could say no, but what might happen if I finally did. The next afternoon, I found myself walking through the glass doors of Whitman Trust Management, the very building where I had first been handed the responsibility I never asked for. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and new carpet, the air cool enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. I checked in with the receptionist, then waited by a tall window, where the city spread below in neat blocks of red brick and slate roofs. Asheville looked both old and new from up here, the mountains pressing in like silent witnesses. Patricia Hayes arrived promptly, as she always did. She was a woman in her 50s, with sleek silver hair that framed a sharp but not unkind face. She had guided me patiently through quarterly reports, explaining what dividends meant, why diversification mattered, how to balance distributions with long-term growth. If David had been alive, he would have known these things by instinct. I had learned them the hard way through listening scribbling notes and swallowing the fear of failing. Mrs. Marston Patricia said warmly, extending her hand. "Shall we go over this month's approvals?" I followed her into a conference room, the kind with a long table too polished to touch without leaving smudges. She laid a folder in front of me, sliding it open to reveal pages of neat charts and columns. "As you know," she began, "the trust continues to perform well. Portfolio growth is steady, and the real estate holdings are stable. The matter at hand is discretionary distributions. Ava's monthly request is pending your authorization." The way she said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, made the number feel like any other line item. But to me, it wasn't numbers. It was my daughter's life, her condo, her travel, her carefully curated existence. Patricia pointed to another section. "I want to remind you of the terms. The trust stipulates that the trustee must exercise prudence and ensure allocations support both beneficiaries and broader charitable commitments. The late Mr. Marston's grandfather required this as a condition for sustaining family wealth. Distributions are discretionary, not automatic." I nodded slowly, tracing the words with my eyes. Discretionary. That single word meant Ava had no legal claim to what she believed she deserved. She had no power here, not unless I gave it to her. Patricia's gaze softened. "You've always acted with integrity, Evelyn. But I sense this month feels different." I hesitated. The weight of the folder seemed heavier than paper. "She told me she's not my bank anymore," I admitted. My voice caught before I could steady it. In front of her friends, as if I were a burden. And yet here I am, deciding whether to fund her life another month. What kind of mother denies her child? Patricia folded her hands. What kind of trustee ignores her duty? They are not the same role, Evelyn. You can love her as her mother and still hold the line as trustee. That's why the documents named you and not her. The family knew you would protect the legacy, not squander it. Her words should have comforted me, but they only deepened the ache. Motherhood had always been sacrifice-giving, providing, stretching myself thin. Stewardship, on the other hand, demanded restraint, accountability, even refusal. Could I truly wear both mantles at once? Patricia slid another page forward. It outlined the Trust's charitable obligations funds directed each year to local initiatives in education and community health. These commitments must remain intact, she said gently. If Ava's lifestyle threatens them, you have a duty to adjust. I stared at the ink, the neat legal phrasing that gave me authority and bound my conscience. David's words from his letters echoed. Teach her resilience, not indulgence. My hands trembled as I closed the folder. Patricia rose, her voice quiet but firm. Remember, Evelyn, Ava is not entitled to the trust. She is supported by it at your discretion. You hold the pen. I gathered my purse, the folder tucked inside, and left the building with the mountains once again spread before me. The streets bustled below, cars, honking people moving briskly, unaware of the choice pressing at my chest. I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the tug of love, and the steady weight of responsibility all colliding inside me. Could duty and love ever be written on the same ledger? I wasn't sure. But I knew the time was coming when I would have to decide which one I would let guide my hand. A week later, Ava invited me to dinner at her condo. The message was breezy, almost careless. A few friends coming over, you should join. 6 sharp. I nearly declined, still carrying the sting of her words at the cafe and the gallery. But something in me decided to go. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps curiosity. Or perhaps it was the folder from Whitman Trust still sitting on my desk, its weight reminding me who really held the strings. The evening light cast the city in amber as I arrived. Ava's building gleamed against the mountains, its mirrored windows catching the last of the sun. I rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor, the quiet hum in my ears matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. When the doors slid open, laughter spilled into the hallway. Ava's condo glowed warm with dimmed lights and the clink of glasses. She greeted me at the door, immaculate as ever, a glass of wine already in her hand. Behind her, the dining table was crowded with plates of charcuterie bowls of olives and bottles of imported wine. Her friends milled around, the kind of people who seemed to live effortlessly in heels and tailored suits. "Mom, you made it?" Ava said brightly, brushing a kiss against my cheek as if all were well. "Come in, sit down. We were just talking about money." I slipped into a chair at the end of the table. Across from me, a man in a navy blazer leaned back, smirking. "Your daughter here was just telling us she's finally cut the cord. Standing on her own now." Ava raised her glass with a grin. I told them I'm not my mother's bank anymore. I had to draw a line. The table erupted in laughter, sharp and amused. One woman pressed her hand against her chest as if scandalized. "Good for you, Ava. Boundaries are everything." I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my face still. My fork traced the edge of the plate in front of me, catching the reflection of candlelight. Ava looked directly at me, then daring me to protest, her eyes gleaming with triumph. I smiled instead. Just faintly, just enough to be polite. The kind of smile one gives when the punchline is not meant for them, but they'll play along. Conversations swirled around the table, stocks, renovations, vacations planned for the spring. Ava basked in the attention, retelling the story of our supposed financial dynamic, as if she were the one holding things together. Each laugh at her words landed like a pebble against glass, sharp and brittle. Inside, the truth sat steady in me. I thought of Patricia's calm reminder in that conference room. "You hold the pen." I thought of the unopened message on my phone, waiting for me to approve or deny her monthly request. And I thought of Ava's laughter, now buoyed by ignorance, loud, because she had no idea how fragile her scaffolding really was. I lifted my glass of water and sipped slowly, watching her friends toast to independence she hadn't earned. Silence, I realized, was its own kind of armor. It allowed me to sit in that room cloaked in their misunderstanding, while the reality pulsed quietly in my chest. Dinner stretched long into the evening stories, spilling over the wine. When at last I excused myself, Ava barely noticed too caught in a story about her next trip to Miami. I kissed her cheek, felt the warmth of her skin, and left her to her audience. The elevator hummed again as it carried me down, and I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. My faint smile lingered not out of joy, but because I alone knew the truth they all mistook. For now, silence held it safe. But I wondered how long silence could shield dignity before it fractured. The morning after Ava's dinner, I woke with a heaviness that refused to lift. Her laughter still echoed in my ears, her voice rising above the clinking glasses. I'm not my mother's bank anymore. On the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a second reminder from Whitman Trust. The request hadn't gone away. It waited for me like an unopened letter on a desk. Approval required Ava Marston, $15,000. Deadline 5:00 p.m. The screen glowed in my hand. My thumb hovered, trembling. I thought of David's letters of the years of receipts of the coupon folded in my purse, and I thought of Mia, bright, grateful Mia on the cusp of adulthood. If I kept feeding Ava's illusion, what lesson would Mia learn? That dependency was a birthright, that cruelty carried no cost. I exhaled slowly. Then I tapped the screen and with deliberate care typed a single word, denied. The word appeared stark, in black letters, final and irreversible. I stared at it for a long moment, a strange calm washing through me. My chest ached, but beneath the ache was something steadier, like stone settling into place. That afternoon, I busied myself in the garden, pruning roses and clearing leaves, trying to ignore the faint tightness in my throat. By evening, my phone began to vibrate again, first once, then twice, then continuously. Ava. I didn't answer. The first real consequence came the next day. I had just returned from the market when I saw her name flash across the screen, followed by a string of frantic messages. My card isn't working. What did you do? They embarrassed me in front of everyone. Call me back right now. Later, I learned what had happened. Ava had gone shopping downtown at one of her favorite boutiques. She had carried armfuls of clothes into the dressing room, her friends waiting nearby, sipping complimentary champagne. At the register, she had swiped her platinum card confident as ever. Declined. She tried again, a nervous laugh covering her surprise. Declined. The screen blinked. The clerk's smile tightened, and behind Ava, a woman in line raised her brows. One of Ava's friends whispered something that made the others giggle. When the clerk finally said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Marston. The payment isn't going through," Ava's cheeks had flushed crimson. She abandoned the bags and stormed out her heels, striking sharp against the floor, her audience trailing uncomfortably behind. By the time she called me again, her voice was raw with fury. "What did you do? Why didn't the money go through?" I sat at the kitchen table staring at the pale light shifting across the floorboards. "I made a decision," I said quietly. "One that needed to be made." Her silence was sharp at first, then filled with disbelief. "You can't do this to me. That's my allowance. My life depends on it." I wanted to remind her of all the times my life had depended on smaller amounts on clipped coupons, on a neighbor's kind word, on the $37 I once stretched to cover an entire week. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened to her breath on the other end, ragged with anger, edged with panic. "You'll thank me one day," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. When I ended the call, I felt the ache of sorrow settle heavy in my chest. No mother wants to humiliate her child. And yet alongside the ache, there was something else. Something almost like relief. For the first time, I had chosen principle over guilt. That night, As the wind moved through the pines outside, I sat alone with the knowledge of what I had done. A single word had redrawn the boundaries of our lives. The cost of pressing deny was mine to bear, but so too, perhaps, was the hope that something better might rise from it. The days after I pressed, deny stretched long and uneasy. Ava's silence was brief. Soon it broke into a storm of messages, calls, and furious voicemails. At first, her words were sharp, demanding, as if the glitch at the boutique had been a temporary inconvenience. But when days passed and no funds arrived, the edges of her voice frayed. By the end of the week, she was leaving messages at midnight. "They're charging me late fees, Mom. Do you understand what that means? My landlord won't wait forever." Another. "The credit card company called me at work. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I listened to them with the phone pressed to my chest, the ache in me sharpening with each word. I had kept the staff paid at her building, ensuring the doorman, the maintenance crew, and the cleaning service never missed a check. I couldn't bring myself to punish those who worked quietly in the background. But Ava couldn't see that. In her eyes, I had cut the rope and left her dangling over the edge. By the second week, her friends began to drift away. I heard it in the spaces of her voice when she called, how she tried to sound busy, important, but the echo of emptiness gave her away. Once I saw her downtown, walking with two women I recognized from the gallery event. They stopped at a cafe, glanced at the menu, then whispered to each other before one of them stepped back. Ava's smile faltered as they walked inside without her. She stood outside, phone clutched in her hand, pretending to scroll. I sat in my car across the street, invisible, watching my daughter learn what money had always shielded her from the fragility of loyalty built on image. At home that evening, she left another message. This one sounded smaller, thinner. "I can't keep up, Mom. They're cutting off my utilities next. Do you want me living in the dark?" I thought of the nights I had worked by candlelight when the power company cut service after Charles died. I hadn't told Ava then. She had been too young, tucked into bed, while I graded papers by the soft flame. It wasn't darkness that frightened me. It was the thought that she might never learn to find her own light. One morning, I opened the mailbox to find an envelope addressed in Ava's hand. Inside was a notice she had forwarded her rent demand, stamped in red. No note, no greeting, just the paper, as if to say, "Look at what you've done." I folded it neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the shoebox under my bed, where the old receipts lived. It belonged there, I thought, a record of the choices that bound us. That week, Patricia called. "Mrs. Marston, I assume you're aware Ava has been contacting the trust directly. I wanted to reassure you she has no authority here. Only you decide." Her voice steadied me. Still, when I hung up, the guilt returned in waves. Each night, I lay awake listening to the creak of the pines, wondering if my silence was strength or cruelty. The breaking point came one Saturday when Ava arrived at my house, unannounced. She looked thinner, her hair less polished, a fine crack showing in her perfect facade. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed, her eyes, a mixture of anger and desperation. "You've abandoned me," she said. "I can't pay for anything. Do you want me homeless? Is that your goal?" I held the doorframe, steadying myself. Behind her, the wind rustled through the trees, the sound like a low, ancient reminder. "I've paid the staff," I told her softly. "Your roof, your building, they're safe. But the rest, Ava, the rest is yours to face." She stared at me as if trying to decide whether to rage or collapse. Finally, she turned sharply and walked down the steps, heels striking the stone. I stood in the doorway long after she disappeared, the echo of her steps fading into the evening. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if collapse was the only teacher she might ever listen to. I asked Ava to meet me at the old Marston estate the following week. It wasn't the home we had lived in after Charles died, but the ancestral house his grandfather had built in the foothills outside Asheville. White columns rose above a circular drive, the kind of architecture that seemed meant to intimidate as much as impress. The place had been kept in the family by the trust maintained by gardeners and caretakers long after it stopped being anyone's true residence. When Ava arrived, she wore dark sunglasses, though the day was overcast. Her heels clicked sharply on the stone steps as she approached, arms folded across her chest. "Why here?" she asked flatly. "Because some truths require walls that can hold them," I replied. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and old wood. Oil portraits stared down from the walls. Marstons of generations past, their stern gazes a silent jury. Patricia Hayes was waiting in the study, a folder of documents neatly arranged on the long mahogany table. She greeted Ava with the same professional calm she always carried, though her eyes softened when they flicked toward me. We sat. Ava leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, impatience radiating from every line of her posture. "So what's this about? Another lecture on my spending?" Patricia opened the folder and slid a page across the table. "It's about authority," she said evenly, "and clarity. You've contacted our office repeatedly in recent weeks. I think it's best we address the matter directly." Ava's chin lifted. "Good. Because I want my allowance restored. It's not optional, it's mine." Patricia's voice did not waver. "It isn't yours, Ava. Not by right. The Marston Family Trust is a discretionary trust. That means distributions are made at the sole judgment of the trustee." Ava blinked, then barked a laugh. "Trustee, you mean Dad. Or his lawyers. Not her." She jabbed a manicured finger toward me. Patricia folded her hands. "Your father passed years ago. The documents stipulate succession. Since her 67th birthday, your mother has been the sole trustee. She alone decides when and how funds are distributed. That authority is absolute under the terms of the trust." The words hung heavy, echoing against the marble fireplace and the high ceilings. Ava turned to me, disbelief twisting her features. "This is insane. You've been holding this power all along." I met her gaze steadily. "Yes." Her face reddened, fury spilling over. "That money is mine by right. I'm a Marston too. You can't just cut me off like some stranger begging at the door." I reached into the folder and pulled out a copy of the trust document, the inked signatures still bold despite the years. I laid it before her, the words stark and undeniable. "Read it," I said softly. She snatched the paper, scanned it quickly, then tossed it back onto the table as though it burned her. "This is manipulation. You've twisted things." Patricia's tone remained even. "The provisions are clear. The trustee must act with prudence, ensuring the sustainability of the trust and the fulfillment of its charitable obligations. Mrs. Marston has both the authority and the duty to make these decisions." Ava pushed back from the table, the legs of her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. Her voice cracked between rage and desperation. "You've humiliated me. You've made me look weak in front of everyone. And now you expect me to just accept this." The portraits on the walls seemed to lean closer, their painted eyes fixed on the spectacle. Silence pressed in, thick and cold as the marble beneath our feet. I folded my hands atop the table, steadying myself. "It isn't about humiliation, Ava. It's about truth, and it's time you finally faced it." Ava's voice rang sharp against the study's paneled walls. "You can't do this to me, Mom. You can't. I'll sue. I'll take you to court and they'll force you to release what's mine." Her hands were fists on the polished table, her cheeks flushed deep with fury. The grandeur of the Marston estate seemed to amplify her desperation, every outburst bouncing back at her from marble and oak. Patricia remained calm, as steady as stone. "Ava, you can retain legal counsel if you choose, but the documents are explicit. Your mother has discretionary authority. Courts uphold that. You will not succeed. Ava's glare darted from Patricia to me, her eyes bright with disbelief. She's twisting this, using it to punish me. Don't you see that I inhaled slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of the trust papers still spread before us? This isn't punishment, I said. My voice was steady, though my heart thudded painfully in my chest. It's accountability. There's a difference. Her fury faltered for a moment, replaced by a plea. She leaned forward, her voice softening, trembling. Mom, please. Just this once. You know my rent is due. You know I have bills stacked up. Help me this time, and I swear I'll figure things out after. I closed my eyes briefly, and for a fleeting moment, I saw her as a child again, 8 years old, standing in our kitchen in ballet slippers too big for her feet, begging me to let her try just one more spin. The little girl who needed me, who trusted me to make the world safe. But the woman before me was not that girl. She was 45 years old, her voice breaking with desperation, not because she had tried and failed, but because she had never learned to stand without a net beneath her. You've had years of just this once, I said quietly, her expression twisted, tears welling now. So you want me to fail, to end up with nothing? Patricia leaned forward slightly. That is not what your mother wants, Ava. She is fulfilling her duty, protecting the trust, protecting the family's future. Her decisions are lawful and prudent. The words didn't soothe her. Ava wiped angrily at her cheeks, the mascara smudging. Future? What future? You think I can just live like some nobody while all this money sits locked away? It's cruel. I rose slowly from my chair, each movement deliberate so she couldn't mistake my steadiness for weakness. Cruel would be letting you go on like this, pretending that dependence is freedom. Cruel would be teaching Mia that money is love and that respect doesn't matter. No, Ava. Cruelty would be to say yes again. Her tears spilled freely now, streaks glistening down her face. She sank back into the chair, shaking her head, words tumbling in fragments. You don't understand. You don't. I'll lose everything. Patricia slid another paper across the table, her tone even but firm. Your mother is within her rights. She has acted prudently, and the trust remains strong. If you wish to contest, any lawyer will tell you the same. She has done nothing unlawful. Ava's eyes met mine, then red-rimmed raw. So that's it. You're cutting me off. I steadied myself, the words forming not from anger, but from a place carved by years of sacrifice and disappointment. No, Ava. I'm not cutting you off. I'm setting terms. Respect is the rent for my trust. Without it, there can be no allowance. The silence that followed was vast, filling every corner of the room. The portraits on the walls seemed to lean closer, their painted faces solemn witnesses to the reckoning. Ava pressed her lips together, trembling, and for the first time in years she looked small in the space she had always tried to command. I did not move to comfort her. I only stood, hands resting firmly on the table, knowing that my no was at last an act of love. The study's silence lingered long after Ava's protests faded. I sat back down, my pulse steadying, and opened the folder Patricia had left with me. Pages of numbers and clauses lay before us, but I no longer saw them as abstractions. They were the framework of a life, Ava's, Mia's, and mine. I tapped the first page with my finger. This is what will happen. Now. I said, my voice even. The allowance continues, but on new terms. Ava's eyes flickered with hope, then narrowed with suspicion. 7,000 a month, I continued. Not 15. It will cover rent, groceries, utilities. Essentials, nothing more. And you will submit a budget report each quarter. I want proof the money is used responsibly. Her mouth fell open, a protest forming, but Patricia spoke first. That is entirely within your authority, Mrs. Marston. A discretionary distribution with oversight is sound practice. I turned another page. Tuition for Mia will be paid directly to the university. She will not depend on you to manage her education. That responsibility is mine now." Something in Ava's face tightened. For years, she had dangled tuition as leverage, a way to secure more for herself by claiming Mia's needs. Now, with a single sentence, that leverage was gone. "And finally," I said, sliding another paper across the table, "a portion of the trust will be allocated annually to local charities. The Asheville Arts Council will receive funding for youth programs, and a new line will go to elder abuse prevention initiatives. Those causes matter, and they will outlast either of us." Ava's voice cracked. "You're giving my money away." "It was never your money," I said softly. "It was entrusted to me to be used wisely. And wisdom means more than keeping one person comfortable while others go without." She sank back in her chair, stunned into silence. The fury that had animated her seemed to drain away, replaced by something heavier recognition perhaps, though she would never admit it. Patricia gathered the papers into a neat stack. "We'll draft the revisions today. These terms are defensible, sustainable, and fair." She looked at me, her expression unreadable but approving. "You've struck the balance most trustees struggle to find." I exhaled slowly, feeling both lighter and older, all at once. Years of guilt had pressed me into silence, but now the words were spoken, the boundaries drawn. Ava sat across from me, her eyes, glassy lips pressed tight. She looked less like a woman in command and more like a child, realizing that the rules had changed. The portraits on the walls watched us still, their painted faces stern but not unkind. I wondered if they approved of what I had done, or if approval even mattered. 7,000, Ava whispered finally, as if tasting the number. She didn't look at me when she spoke. I folded my hands, my decision unshaken. The terms were set, and for the first time in years, I felt I had acted not out of fear, but out of respect. Respect for the trust for Mia, and even in a way for Ava herself. The change came faster than I expected. Within 2 months, the shine of Ava's condo dulled under the weight of overdue notices and pared-down allowances. She fought against the new reality, at first pleading, bargaining, even threatening. But numbers don't bend for tantrums. $7,000 didn't cover penthouse views and weekend flights. One Saturday, she appeared on my porch with a cardboard box in her arms. Behind her, a moving truck idled at the curb, the driver impatiently tapping the wheel. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, her hair pulled into a loose knot. The sight of her without her usual polish startled me. "They're cutting the power next week," she said flatly. "I found a smaller place. West Asheville. 2 bedrooms, older building. It'll do." She didn't ask for sympathy, and I didn't offer any. Instead, I helped her carry the boxes inside and made coffee, letting the silence settle like dust between us. Weeks later, I heard through an old acquaintance that Ava had taken a part-time position at the community nonprofit where I once volunteered. They ran after-school programs for low-income families, providing meals and tutoring. The thought of my daughter, who once scoffed at the idea of coupon clipping, sorting, donated school supplies, or managing paperwork for grants, was almost impossible to picture. When I visited one afternoon unannounced, I found her in the back office. She was bent over a stack of folders, her blazer traded for a cardigan, her nails unpolished. She looked up, startled, then quickly masked it with irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I had a meeting nearby," I lied. "Thought I'd stop in." She bristled, but her cheeks flushed with something other than anger. Embarrassment, perhaps. She gestured to the papers. "They needed help with filing. It's temporary." I nodded. "Still, it's good work. Honest work." For a moment, her eyes softened. Then she looked away, muttering, "It doesn't pay much." I didn't press her. There was a vulnerability in her voice I hadn't heard since she was a girl, admitting she'd fallen from the balance beam in gym class. It was small, fleeting, but it was real. As I walked back to my car, I felt a quiet pride blooming in me, tempered with caution. She was bending, yes, but bending is not the same as breaking old habits. Humility can grow in the cracks of shame, but it can just as easily wither if not tended. That night, I sat by my window with David's letters. The pine trees outside swaying in the dark. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps Ava could change. Not because I gave her everything, but because I finally stopped. The first cool night of autumn brought Ava back to my door. She didn't call ahead. She simply appeared standing on the porch with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though the chill in the air had found its way under her skin. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside. She walked past me into the living room, her steps slow, uncertain. The cardigan she wore hung loose on her frame, and I noticed how her makeup, once so meticulously applied, had been pared down to almost nothing. We sat opposite each other, the fire in the hearth crackling softly. For a long while she stared at the flames, her hands twisting together in her lap. I waited, letting silence do its work. Finally, her voice broke the stillness. "I thought money kept me important." She swallowed her gaze fixed on the fire. "The condo, the trips, the clothes, it made people look at me. It made me feel like I mattered. And now, without it," her voice thinned, trembling, "now I feel invisible." Her words landed heavy in the room, honest, in a way I had longed for, but never expected. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together. "Money can buy attention," I said gently, "but it can't buy importance. Respect makes you visible, Ava, not money." Her eyes flicked to mine, wide and wet. For a moment I saw the little girl she had once been, asking questions she couldn't quite form, needing answers she couldn't find alone. She shook her head. "I don't know if I can change. I don't know who I am without all that." I breathed deeply before replying. "Change doesn't come all at once. It comes in choices, small ones made every day. You're working now, contributing to something beyond yourself. That matters." Her lips pressed together, trembling. "It's humiliating. Filing papers, answering phones. People look at me differently. Or maybe they're seeing you for the first time," I said, softly. "Not the clothes, not the condo, just you." Tears slid down her cheeks and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I hate that it took all this for me to see it. I hate that you had to be the one to stop me." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. Her skin was cool, her fingers stiff. But after a moment, she let them rest in mine. "Love isn't always yes," I whispered. "Sometimes love is no, and sometimes no is the only way to save what matters." The fire popped, sending a small spray of sparks upward. Ava's shoulders sagged, her breath shuddering out. For the first time in years, the defiance in her seemed to quiet, leaving behind something raw and fragile. We sat like that for a long time, the flames settling into glowing embers, both of us staring into the ashes as if answers might rise from them. The morning sun angled through my kitchen window, spilling across the table where a blank sheet of paper lay waiting. I had been thinking for weeks about what I owed Mia, not in dollars or tuition payments, but in something deeper. My granddaughter would be leaving for Chapel Hill soon, stepping into a life of her own. I didn't want her to carry the same blind weight her mother had. I uncapped my pen and began to write. "My dearest Mia, by the time you read this, you'll be starting new routines, new friendships, perhaps even new dreams you haven't yet discovered. You'll also face temptations, the kind that whisper, comfort is easier than discipline, that money can stand in for meaning. I need you to remember one thing: love is the gift, respect is the receipt. Never confuse the two. If you give love but do not demand respect, you will spend yourself empty. If you receive money without respect, it will never fill you." I paused, letting the words settle into me as much as onto the page. I thought of all the years I had showered Ava with provision, mistaking indulgence for love. In my fear of her growing up fatherless, I had bought her security without teaching her gratitude. It had nearly hollowed her out. I would not repeat that mistake. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote Mia's name in neat script across the front. This was the inheritance I wanted her to hold, closest, not bank accounts, not allowances, but a compass for dignity. That evening, I set the table for Sunday dinner. The roast chicken browned in the oven, carrots and potatoes simmered on the stove. It had been months since Ava last joined us, and I wasn't sure she would come even after agreeing. But just before 6, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. When the door opened, she stepped inside, with Mia beside her. Ava wore no heels, no designer bag, just a simple dress, her hair brushed but unstyled. Her face looked softer, quieter, as though some of the fight had drained away. "Smells good," she murmured almost awkwardly. We ate slowly, the conversation carried mostly by Mia, who chattered about professors she hoped to study with and dorm assignments she'd just received. I watched Ava across the table. She hardly spoke, but she listened. Really listened. Her fork moved absently, her eyes following Mia, with something like wonder, maybe even envy. At one point, she caught me watching her. For a moment, her expression faltered, pride and shame warring in her eyes. She looked down quickly, but not before I glimpsed a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. When dessert was done and the plates cleared, we lingered over tea. The evening light softened through the windows, and the old pines outside rustled in a slow, steady wind. The house felt fuller than it had in a long time. As Mia laughed at some small joke, I pressed my palm lightly over the envelope in my pocket, the letter I would give her before she left. My resolve was clear now. Money could support, but it could never substitute. My true gift to her would be teaching the balance I had once ignored. Across the table, Ava sat in silence, watchful and subdued. She didn't ask for anything, didn't offer excuses. She simply remained present in a way she never had before, and for now, that was enough. The months that followed moved slowly like a river smoothing stones. By winter's end, I had finally seen to the repairs at the cabin in Black Mountain. The porch boards no longer sagged, the chimney stood straight, and the old shutters once again caught the light like they were meant to. It felt like stitching up something inside me, mending not just wood and brick, but memory itself. On a bright morning in early spring, I hung the wind chimes I had made from the shards of David's old mug. It had been his favorite, chipped at the rim, impossible to part with, even after years of use. Now its pieces were strung together with ribbon, tinkling gently whenever the breeze stirred through the pines. Each note was a reminder broken things could still make music. I carried a cup of tea out to the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the chill. The mountains stood quiet and steady before me, their outlines softened by mist. For once, the stillness didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That was when the phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the number was familiar. Ava. I answered, bracing myself, but her voice was low, stripped of its usual edge. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Ava." Silence stretched, filled only by the faint whistle of wind through the chimes. Then she spoke again, haltingly. "I'm not calling for money. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the things I said. For not seeing what you carried all those years." My hand tightened around the cup, the steam fogging my glasses. I closed my eyes and listened, letting the words reach the places in me that had long waited for them. "I can't fix everything," she went on, her voice breaking, "but I needed you to know I regret it. All of it." For a long time I said nothing, not because I didn't have words, but because the silence felt more truthful than any quick response. When I finally spoke, it was simple. "Thank you, Ava." She exhaled almost a sob, and then the line went quiet. I set the phone down beside me and leaned back, the wooden chair creaking in its familiar rhythm. The wind moved through the trees, through the chimes, carrying with it a sound that was both fragile and enduring. In that moment, I thought of Mia, of the letter tucked safely among her college things, of the promise I had made to myself not to repeat old mistakes. Love was the gift I had always given freely. Respect was the receipt I would demand from now on. I lifted my tea, watching the steam curl upward and vanish. The world was quieter now, but not diminished. I had learned at last what to keep. If respect, not inheritance, were the only legacy you left, would your family treasure it or squander it like dust?